Okay, so this video is going to focus on how to make a fireball spell. So let's jump right into it. So go up to Game Object and go to Particle System, and we'll call this Fireball. Now let's go to Shape, change it to a circle. We will rotate this. Let's shrink the radius. Let's slow down the lifetime. Let's slow down the speed. And something I've mentioned before, when you're working with particle systems, it's a lot like sculpting, because you're going to find yourself making all these tiny little tweaks, and sometimes you actually may find yourself accidentally making an effect that you really like and you save it for something else. So let's change size. Let's change the emission. Now when you change the emission rate, make sure that you don't hit your max particles, because if you do, you'll get these blanks where the particle system waits until some particles are destroyed. So this max particle really does make a difference. So sometimes you want that, sometimes you may use that to force a dead space, but often max particles are really used to control resources. In other words, how resource intensive do you want this particle system to be? So let's bump this up. Get in there. Let's slow this down a little bit more. And let's make it last not quite as long. And let's now, the start color will be yellow. Now we'll go to color over lifetime. Click on that. And we'll choose red. And for transparency up here, before you change that one, put a just by clicking, you create another key here. That way you don't change the transparency through the entire life. You just want it to drop off at the end. Reason for that is because we're going to both make the particles get smaller and transparent as they get to the end of their life cycle. So let's also do that. We'll go to size of a lifetime. Add a keyframe similarly towards the end. And then we have it drop off. That way you don't just have the particles disappearing, they both shrink and become transparent. Now let's make the particle size just a little bit bigger. We want that to be a little fuller. Alright, I think we're almost there. Now it doesn't look like much of anything because it's just kind of bubbling into place, which also might be the effect that you want. Now if you notice there's a script down here, I'm going to open this up. And generally I'll write the scripts out while I'm doing this, but it's really, there's not much to it. So first we can get rid of that, because I was just testing something. We can get rid of that, because I was just testing something. So really all you have in here is a single line in the start section that says get component, rigid body 2D, velocity, new vector 2, 5, 0. So this is moving left to right because it's a positive x velocity and a 0 vertical velocity. So let's save that if I haven't already. Click on Fireball. And in case you don't know, you can just right click, choose Create in C#, it'll get you the same thing. So let's take that, drag and drop it. And then, if you notice, the script was trying to access a rigid body 2D, so we need to add that as well. Let's get rid of the gravity. And now, by adding that, this will now shoot across the screen. It's not done yet, but I want to demonstrate something. See how it's basically staying in place? What I mean by staying in place is it's moving, but if you notice, the particles aren't falling away. So they're staying relative. So I shouldn't have said stayed in place. What I should have said is stayed relative to the center. So there's a couple ways that you can change that. In simulation space, you can change that to world. And so now it creates a trail, but now you really kind of lose that core center. So that might be what you're looking for. But if you really want to kind of keep that core center, what you can do is, rather than doing simulation space world, you can instead go to velocity over lifetime and tweak that. Now, because I rotated it, you would normally think, okay, well, I'm trying to change left and right, so it'd be the X, but it's rotated, so it's actually the Y that has to move. Well, actually, am I incorrect? No, I'm wrong. It is the X that's moving. Sorry about that. I must have rotated it differently when I was testing. Now, as you can see, you kind of got some strange overlap because you see this ring kind of appearing and disappearing. So, in the renderer section, for sorting mode, choose youngest in front. Now let's see how that looks. Let's start with a pre-warm. Let's start with pre-warm. It's still not quite the effect I wanted, and I'm wondering if I made this radius a little bit too small. So let's make the radius a little bit bigger, but then that means we need to make the start size a little bit bigger to compensate, because now it's a larger area. Okay. Alright, so that might be actually what you're looking for. I think the start size is a little bit too big, so let's drop that down to 4 or 5. And there's often a balancing act between start size and the amount of emissions. So as you change the size, you probably have to change the emission. Generally speaking, if you're reducing the size, you probably increase the emission to keep gaps from appearing, and so the individual particles won't be quite as evident. Okay, so that's kind of fireballish. Let's make the circle slightly smaller. I think I went a little bit too big. Let's also have the yellow stay yellow longer. Oops. Sorry, clicked on the wrong one. I wanted to click here. Just choose a yellow. It doesn't have to be the exact yellow. We're not going for that level of precision in this particular demonstration. Well, we can make this a little bit whiter. Okay. That way it's going from a whiter pale yellow to a brighter yellow to red. Now let's just make the X a little bit more. Okay, one last tweak and I think we'll be done. Let's make the size over time. We'll create a key towards the beginning. And what we're going to do is, right now it's appearing at full size. By adding this key, it will actually start off smaller. so that way it doesn't pop into existence full size. It kind of blooms into existence. Maybe speed's a little bit too much. Yeah, it makes it more solid. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add additional particle systems. So right now you kind of just have flames here that kind of disappear. Let's add like a trail of like embers. So game object, particle system, so we're creating a new particle system. These are going to be really tiny. So start size like 0.1. And we can keep the cone. We're just going to turn it more into a cylinder. And these will definitely blink out of existence. So start color will be red, since they're coming off the tail. And they will be... they won't live that long. Now we need to rotate this. Okay. Looks like it needs to be 0, negative 90, 90. Now what you can do is you now attach this. We'll rename this embers. And just drag and drop it onto the fireball, turning it into a child. So now when this moves, so will the embers. It's going to be a little bit hard to see because it's a gray background. I definitely can see it, but it's a little bit hard on the gray background. So I'm going to splice here. I'm going to drag in just a white background so you can see it against a white background. Okay, so there's our white background. Let's just drag and drop it. And we'll set this at -1, since by default everything else shows up at 0. So by dragging this to -1, that should let us see the background. Actually, let's make this slightly gray. That way the yellow shows up as well. So there you go. So now you can see the embers. They're kind of big, and they're really not moving enough. So, a few changes to them. Start size, let's bring that down to 0.5. And start lifetime, we'll make it 0.5. And as I mentioned with simulation space, we'll change it to world so they do get left behind. There we go. Kind of subtle. Let's increase the emission because it's still very low. There we go. Not exactly the effect I was looking for, but you can always play with that to get a little bit more what you want. And now we're going to go ahead and create another particle system. We'll call this smoke ring. So again, we'll change the shape to circle. We want emit from edge. We need to rotate this, and we need to shrink the start size, And we need to shrink the life and the speed. And now what we're going to do is for emission, rather than using a rate, we're going to use burst. So at 0, we're going to have it burst by, let's see, how does 500 look? And then we want the ring to appear, say, every, let's do 0.4. Okay, so ring's too big, so we'll shrink the radius. Let's make the start color be gray, since it's meant to be smoke. Shrink it a little bit more. Doesn't last long enough, so start lifetime, let's make that 0.8. And we really don't want there to be, well, we might want more than one ring at a time. For now, we'll make this also 0.8, so there's just one ring. Now we kind of have to trick the system, because since you're in the 2D mode, 3D really doesn't work right. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate along, I guess we're rotating along the x-axis. Let's see what it says up here when we rotate. Is we're going to rotate it left to right. So it's the y-axis actually. The reason for it is you can see now it looks like as if you're seeing a ring from the side. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that. Well, I should just drag it. And now we take the smoke ring and also drag and drop it, and turning it also into a child. And now we're going to also make this world. And let's see how that looks. So not quite right. We really want more rings than that. So a couple ways you can do this. You can either have more bursts, although it maxes out at 4, or we'll just decrease the time. So which is what we had earlier. Still not quite right. And again, like I said, it's like sculpting. And actually, let's increase this because we're probably hitting the max particle size. There we go. Almost done. Now, the ring, smoke ring, is really just disappearing, and we don't want that. We want it to also, like we did with the fire, we want it to break up and become translucent. So color over lifetime, we'll click on that. Again, we'll let it stay solid for part and then have it become translucent. And this again is purely subjective, whatever look it is that you want. Let's also make sure we've got gray here. But you'll notice that as you make objects translucent, they have a tendency to go white. So basically I put 2 grays at the bottom, put a keyframe here so it's not becoming translucent at first, then it becomes translucent. And we can do size over lifetime, and then we're going to be just about done. So similarly, we add a keyframe towards the end, then drop it off there. And there you go, you've shot a fireball. And now you could just use that as a side-scrolling shooter, or whatever other usage you want. Okay, so say you want to have your fireball be a light source. So as it's moving, it actually casts light onto the surrounding area like a real fire would. So let's take a look how to do that. Now first we have to make one quick change, because when you start looking at light and shadow, location within a scene along the z-axis starts to matter more. Like right now, this works just fine. Okay, but if I want light light and shadow to appear on the background, okay, I have to apply a material. When you apply a material, it starts caring about the z-axis. So right now, if you check, the smoke ring is actually at 1.76, so that's further away away from the camera than the background, which is at 0. So what's going to happen is the smoke rings are going to disappear. So first thing we need to do is we need to change the Z position. So even though we had order in layer 1, once you add materials, it starts caring about that Z position. So simple fix there, we'll just put the white background at +2. You won't see any change now, but there would be an issue if we ran it, if we applied the light but did not change that first. If you want, you can hold off on that change to see for yourself, but I've already tested it. So now for the background, let's change the material. By default, it's Sprite. Let's go to Default Diffused. Makes it really dark because now it's looking for a light source. Although you can make materials that are lighter. I'm just using a random material so you see how to do this. So now go up to Game Object and choose Light and choose Point Light. Now first thing we're going to do is we're going to shrink this. So we grab one of the corners and shrink it in. And when you're doing that, you're actually changing the range of the light. You can see that number changing as I shrink this. Now when you're shrinking it, you're actually shrinking it in 3 dimensions. See how it's an orb? So this one is coming in. That's why you're suddenly noticing the light here getting smaller. Because if I go back, ever so slightly bigger, ever so slightly smaller. So you have to adjust the position because of that. You might have to make it closer to the, again, taking in consideration the z-axis. But as you can see, it does indeed cast light. So a couple things we can do. Play around with the Z a little bit and see how that helps. Okay, so that now it's behind it, so it's not working at all. Oops, I meant -2, sorry. So that would come out more towards the screen. So looking like, let's change the intensity as well. There we go. A little bit more. Now just take that point light and drag and drop it into the fireball so it becomes a child, and now that point light will move with the fireball. There you go. You're now casting light. All right. As you could see, the rings are actually cut off some. They don't look like a full ring. So we'll move the white background back a little bit more. We'll push that to 4, which again misses up the light. So we'll move the light to 2. There we go. So now the rings are full. And just like working with the particle system itself, it's a lot of sculpting where you're making tiny little changes to get the exact aesthetic look that you want. Got to be a little bit careful, because if you make the decision to start to cast shadows and make light, if you only do it on certain objects and not others, you have an inconsistent visual appearance. Like if you're casting a light on a background but characters don't cast shadows, it starts creating this incongruous visual appearance. So those are the overall kinds of art and aesthetic decisions you need to consider. Do you have the resources to be able to make everything have shadows and have light sources? Because once you start with one, you should follow through. So that's about it.